thank you for being here. This is the 18th AMI annual conference. It's dedicated to monetary reform and to reinventing ourselves monetarily, if you will. Stephen Zarlenga started the organization in 1996, 26 years ago, and he had his first conference in 2005. And that conference was, it had a congressman and people from different parts of the world who were concerned about how our Western banking system was working. And he published this book, The Lost Science of Money, and it had a big effect. And people from around the world started reading and having a sense, a moral understanding of how money can work for society. And so one conference led to another conference, and we've been making progress. And about most of these books are gathered from, actually go around the world, and they give a good history of money from Babylon up until the Federal Reserve. And people are, and it's any chapter will give you a little cross section of, or a little historical picture at a given time. So welcome again to the conference. AMI was in existence for about around the 14th conference or so. There was another organization, a sister organization that got started, and that was the Alliance for Just Money. And Lucille was an organizer and its first president for 3 years. And with no further ado, I'll give the floor to Lucille. Thank you, Lucille.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Stephen. So yeah, let me add my welcome to everybody else here. I'm as many of you, but maybe not all of you know, I'm a recently retired professor of philosophy and sociology of education at Illinois State University, where I taught for 20 years. I'm a New Yorker from Long Island, transplanted to Central Illinois by way of Ohio and Botswana in Southern Africa, and then 17 years in Chicago, with 4 of them away in Buffalo, New York for grad school, during which time I married someone with 2 kids in Chicago. So after earning my doctorate and giving birth in 1998, I and my cabinet maker spouse moved to Bloomington Normal, where we raised our now 24-year-old son, and we still live without him. So that just situates who I am, the voice that's speaking to you. I'm also, as Stephen said, a founding member of AFJM and a board member of it. And I would share that AMI really grew out of and with the blessing of AMI. And if I have time at the end of my comments, I will talk a bit about AFJM. If not, you'll definitely see some slides with info on it during our breaks these next 2 days. But my main task that I was given is to give a brief introduction to monetary reform. And I would say that it's both an honor and a challenge to do so. It's an honor because I was at the very first AMI conference back in 2004, and most of them since. And all of us here who knew Stephen Zarlenga, you can see him, I'm holding his picture up now, the AMI founder and the author of the 2002 book, The Lost Science of Money. We all know the respect-worthy work that he did and the path to monetary reform legislation that he forged for us, as well as understanding and education on monetary issues. And that legislation, though, that he forged is the NEED Act that was introduced to Congress in 2010 and which the Alliance has just finished updating this summer as the American Monetary Reform Act. And so it's really, to me, a deep honor and privilege to, as people say, stand on Stephen's shoulders and to give the intro that he often gave himself the first night of AMI. But it's not just an honor, it's a challenge, and it's daunting because this intro is supposed to be short for newcomers to monetary reform, and with many in the room who are more knowledgeable on money and monetary reform than I am. So my intro must be instructive and insightful for the former without displeasing or pissing off the latter, and did I say before, short. So I will do my best. You can email me your complaints or questions after I'll put it in the chat later, or someone else can, but lucille.e@monetaryalliance.org. And I have to trust that Stephen will cut me off when I go too long. And probably what I hoped to do in the intro is to both note and situate the dynamic monetary moment that we are in now in its historical context by explaining what modern money is, when and how modern money originated elsewhere and took root nationwide in the US, where after failing and being rescued between the world wars, it came to pervade and dominate the international monetary system by the 1950s, with most of it being denominated in US dollars, backed, so to speak, by US military might, hardworking people, and exploited and polluted nature. And so if you notice, there was some shift in what I just said, that, you know, it's modern money that has come to dominate, and modern money denominated in US dollars is the most dominant of all in that international monetary system. So I think while it's still true today, as it was in 1950 when it began this way, the US dollar does still dominate the international monetary system, though it's on edge right now. The White House and the Fed are now striving, if not struggling, to maintain that dominance, the dominance of both modern money and the dominance of the US dollar within the modern money system, in the face of other forms of digital assets, which are mostly private cryptocurrencies, but also some public or purportedly public digital assets in the form of what's called central bank digital currency. And these alternative other digital assets, public and private, are competing with modern bank money and threatening not only to do away with the hegemony of the US dollar, but of all nationally denominated modern monies. And as someone who lived over 3 years in rural Africa and close to 2 decades in so-called inner city US, and with diverse indigenous and peoples of color, I would argue that the international dominance of the US dollar mostly exploits rather than serves normal people, the 99%, both in the US and globally, though peoples elsewhere even more than us. But so do all modern monies, the euro, yen, and the Chinese renminbi, even though their system has this internal and external facing that makes it interesting. Canadian dollars, Mexico pesos, every national currency that exists today is to, if not entirely modern money, largely modern money. And that's what AMI and AFJM and other organizations in the International Movement for Monetary Reform, or IMMR, want to supersede or change. But even if we think we have the answer in wholly public, sovereign, just money, the alternatives are still unknown by most, and they're not yet here. And people are fearful of change, naturally so. Me too, among them. So it's really our task to make sure that sovereign just money, a public asset medium of exchange, is on the table, is in the room being dialogued about when these conversations come up at the White House with the executive branch, in the Fed, and with central banks around the world. And that's why we're together today, why Stephen has labored to sustain AMI and Zarlenga's legacy, and why many here founded or joined AFJM over the past 4.5 years. So in my comments, that was sort of prefatory, I hope to touch on what is modern money, when and how did it originate and take root over the last 7 centuries, what's good about it and how it's flawed, and how and why we can and must change it, and why we are in an unprecedented historical moment of opportunity or doom, depending not to an insignificant extent on what we in this room do or fail to do. We don't control it, but we do, to a significant extent, have a role in influencing whether at this historical moment is one of really opportunity and the change that Zarlenga worked for, or a moment of doom that is further entrenching modern money in a digital age. So I'm not going to get to all that, I know, because I'm not ready for it all, but I'm going to do the best with what I have. To explain what modern money is, it's helpful first to grasp what money is. Money itself was and is an amazing human invention across time, people, and place. And all that history is well beyond the scope of this intro, except to say that if money is a unit of account within a community to mediate people's exchange of goods and services, then the very earliest of human written records, the Hammurabi codes, indicate that those distant ancestors already had money, because those codes have what appear to be accounts of grains, if not other produced and or gathered consumables in accounts. So embedded in what I just said is a basic definition of money that works for me. And that is, I think money is a unit of account a people or community agree upon to mediate their exchange of goods and services they personally and collectively produce. I'm just going to say that again with one insert added, that money is, I think, a unit of account that a people or community agree upon to mediate, and in parentheses I'd add, more or less commensurably as it turns out to be over time, their exchange of goods and services that they personally and collectively produce. Various tokens came to be used by different peoples to represent that unit of account in their community. Shells, cows, bits of bronze, silver, or gold, boulders at the bottom of a lake, tally marks on a stick or on many sticks, or numbers or digits in accounts, such as the checking accounts that, or Giro accounts that we all probably have in a bank or credit union today. These tokens themselves may matter. Some serve better to represent money than others do, but they are not the money. They merely represent money. Money itself is abstract. It's conceptual and relational, maybe a social contract. But what do I mean by money being abstract? This is what I mean, and Letier and others have said something similar, that money is our agreement, typically, if not necessarily established in law, but typically so, and today for sure, money is our agreement to accept it in exchange for our effort or for the goods or services we produced, because we agree, because we can and do trust that others will accept it from us in exchange for their productive effort or the goods and services they produce. We all need to produce and consume our share in order to survive and hopefully flourish. And money helps communities of people to do this within their communities and across their communities in increasingly diverse ways. And what is key and essential for any and all money to do its work, which that work again is to lubricate our exchanges effectively and efficiently over time, which the parentheses again, as I sort of said before, which if it's money doing this turns out to mean justly and sustainably over time, not necessarily by our intent, but by the very nature of money. But go back to my main point here. What is key and essential for any and all money to do its work is for the quantity of money. That is the number of bits or the number of units of it in circulation, what we call the money supply, to stay in sync with the productivity of the people whose name it bears and commerce it lubricates. That proper proportion is what allows the value, or which in another word is the purchasing power, of every unit of money in the supply to stay more or less stable over time. And we're not just talking about time as in weeks, months, or even years, though those matter, of course, but stable purchasing power across decades and generations. That's the key. That's the ethical matter involved here. It is in this essential aspect of money, that is, that its quantity staying in proportion with that people's productivity and their survival and flourishing as a people, it's in that essential aspect of money that modern money and the flaws inherent in it, even to this very day, arose about 7 centuries ago and gradually gained traction both in and as institutions that we know today as banks, as they developed, including eventually among them central banks. So why and how did modern money originate in this essential aspect of its quantity staying in sync with the people's productivity? The short answer to both, the why and the how, did modern money originate in this essential aspect of the quantity staying in sync with the people's productivity? The short answer to both is one word: power. And in 3 words, it is the money power. One could say maybe in 5, the power of money. But more specifically, what I mean, that the power, privilege, and responsibility to create money, or what is recognized and accepted as if it is money are necessary to influence or control the quantity of money in circulation. And that power shifted during the, say, 1200s through the 1600s, from medieval, feudal, papal, the Pope, and monarchical powers in city-states who, like in ancient Greece, an era or epoch, much earlier, that had money, but up the in the 1600s, in that period of medieval times, the money power had until then, whether it was feudal lords, kings, popes, had created and circulated the unitary sovereign money of their particular realm. And that shifted over those 400 years or so to private merchants, and a particular subset of private merchants whose work was to handle and verify the quality of precious metals and to trade among them and to keep them and coins made out of them in safekeeping for others, if not also for themselves, and to lend surpluses out to those who temporarily could put it to good productive use. And they lent it out for a price that came to be called interest, even though arguably, and that's a different story, that might not be necessary because surpluses of money sitting there not being money is hurting their purchasing power. And if they're put to get good use by others who can be productive with it, it's helping that money to stay in circulation and people to survive and flourish. Anyhow, that subset of merchant bankers or merchants who became bankers developed bookkeeping and accounting methods to help them do all that work of verifying, handling, safekeeping, and lending, and provided bills of exchange and receipts for coins and metals that were deposited with them. And those bills and receipts, those notes, eventually started to be used as sort of a surrogate money too, since they were fungible with and sooner or later convertible again to the coin of the realm. And over time, these merchant bankers began to create and lend out more receipt notes than they had sovereign money in storage for, because they realized they could get away with it. And maybe because it seemed apparently in the immediate moment to serve not only their good, but the public good. But that banking was born then. Banking as defined by Macmillan as the private or the creation of money out of interest-bearing credit. But that was the private creation of money out of interest-bearing credit at that time. That's really how modern money was born. And the increase in that surrogate money supply at that time, and if you think about what you know about going on in the 14 to 1600s of Europe, and serfs running away from the land to towns, and becoming apprentices, and merchant vessels engaged in trade across oceans and waters, colonial exploration and the slave trade, that sort of surrogate money supply unleashed the power that was latent in people working in conjunction with the gifts of creation, of nature, and the gifts of their human heritage, and economic activity and diversity increased. And while it maybe, and I suspect did appear to be good, that economic activity and diversity, and to some extent it did lift many boats that didn't even exist before that. The benefits were disparate. And many women, children, landless workers, as the commons were enclosed, indigenous peoples around the world and enslaved peoples got nothing or next to nothing, and only or mostly paid with their blood, sweat, tears, and labor, while the merchant bankers gained interest from other people's labors and good through the money system that they gave modern birth to. I'm going to run out of time, and I'm also going to run out of my preparations and do not do justice to the outline I laid out. But how did this give rise to the modern money that we have internationally today? Eventually, virtually all the sovereigns' money ended up in the bankers' vaults. And the monarch and feudal lords, they ended up indebted to them. And, this was gradual over time. And it led, Adrian Kosminski, I don't know if he's in the room, but his Ecology of Money tells a history in excellent ways. And had our history come through Holland rather than England, the world might look very different today, because what was a public central bank, the first one in Holland, in England, the first one was a private institution. And basically in 1694 in England, the institutionalization for the first time of modern money as we still have it today happened through what I would call an unholy alliance between these renegade merchant bankers who really turned their back on the nature of commerce and their trading way of making a living in favor of the taking way of making a living. And those are two terms that Jane Jacobs uses in her Systems of Survival. And the indebted monarch of England, who desired to go to war with France and turned his back on the people of his realm, whose well-being he existed to guard, so that they in turn served his realm as his subjects. The two, the renegade merchant bankers and the indebted monarch, signed a deal in which the monarch could borrow the sovereign money he needed, but no longer had, at a low rate of interest from a new corporation called the Bank of England, formed by a few of the banks or bankers involved. And they gained the right to issue British pound notes to the extent of the King's loan and on the security of the state, and the state agreeing to raise taxes as needed, or to impose taxes as needed to pay off those loans. So I'm out of time, I know, to bring the history to completion and up to date, but the state-sanctioned system of private banks creating as interest-bearing credit means of payment denominated in the sovereign money or the legal tender of that realm or of nations, as nation states really formalized, spread around the world to other countries, nationwide in the US in 1913, even though it existed in practice across states before that, and it became and remains ubiquitous today. And this mode of money creation serves private, not public interests. It has a built-in growth imperative. It increases wealth disparity over time. And perhaps most importantly, for its correction, it disallows or disables from being achievable what I pointed out as the essential aspect of any money system. That is, that its quantity, the quantity of money in circulation, in the supply, stays in proportion with the productivity of the people whose name it bears in commerce, it solely exists to circulate as a steady value within, and most importantly, I'd say, especially in this time of global warming, across generations. And this
Thank you,
is
Lucille.
what the NEED Act and now AMRA intends to achieve. And more on that another time. Thank you, and I will stop there.
Thank you, Lucille. And I let you go on because it was all a very good talk, and thank you for that. And Lucille reminded me, and I should have been more. We just want, we want to, for those, many of us know each other, but for everyone who is new, we want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. And often we begin, we've had the great fortune of having Howard Schweitzer, who writes songs, who sings, and is just a wonderful gentleman from Tennessee, and he's an architect of types, and works on housing and then alternative things, and is in the Green Party, and is very alert on money issues and a general good sense of things. So, but Howard, do you have a song for us today?
I do. In honor of Steven Zarlinga. And but I really appreciated what Lucille was saying, and especially that idea of the money being the exchange mechanism to distribute the produce of those who, among those who produced it. And that we have a system with debt money that is run by those who don't produce, extracting the wealth of those who do. And so we need to change the money. And that's the song. Because the whole world is in trouble now. Everyone can see. Will human life continue? There's no guarantee. Understand the problem affecting me and you. We all need to focus on what we need to do. So let's change the money. No better way to turn the world around now. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. So change the money and make our future bright. It's all about the money now. Time to do it right. Because the bankers create credit, all our money as debt. And that is what is causing the inequity we get. And concentrating all the wealth and power to a few. Don't you think it's high time we tried something new? So let's change the money. No better way to turn the world around now. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. We can make our future bright. It's all about the money now, and it's time to do it right. No more bursting bubbles, no bailing out the banks. Money for production, tell speculators no thanks. We could lower taxes, put money in everyone's pocket, and that would make the economy take off like a rocket, and we could have an economy in a steady state. No more worries over the unemployment rate. No more corporate money choosing who we can elect. And no more corporate lobbies with a Congress we respect. When we change the money, and no better way to turn the world around. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. Change the money. Make our future bright. It's all about the money now. Time to do it right now. I know you're all thinking of all of those possibilities. And we could save the oceans and replant all the trees, have a quality of life beyond anything we've seen. And no more no more, oh gosh, I forgot. No more conflagrations and all our systems green when we change the money. And no better way to turn the world around. Change the money. What's gone up now must come down. So change the money and make our future bright. It's all about the money now. Time to do it right.
Amen.
Ooh, Yeah.
Amen.
And
Yes,
Thank you.
indeed. Thank you to Stephen, a wonderful mentor, and wonderful work, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you all too, again, one more time for being here. And Howard, that was fantastic. And I particularly liked Lucille's introduction too, because it was not only an introduction for the United States in how Zarlenga created things. Lucille took a very broad look and looked at money, how it can be created and how it can be thought about in a worldly perspective. And Lucille talked about the hegemony of the dollar and the need to, as Howard says, for the future to get it right. So this conference, and we're at the beginning of learning how to get it right. And by the time there's the next crisis, we need to have programs, ideas, and people working from around the world, getting it right, having the proposals there. And it's us listening to each other and us getting more people. And this conference will hopefully do some of that. It's only very much a beginning this weekend. We need to hear from many, many more voices from around the world. And those voices are beginning to speak up, and we look forward to hearing more and more voices from around the world. And thank you for that particularly and wonderful introduction, Lucille. If Zarlenga had been alive, I will tell you his beginning of the introduction. He would show you some coins. And he would be talking to a US group and he'd say, who made these coins? Who got the first use of these coins? And we could puzzle over that, but it's actually, I'm going to give you the answer, this case to go faster. It was the Treasury. And while it cost only 5 cents to make this quarter, the Treasury charged the Federal Reserve Bank 25 cents to get it. So that 20 cents was profit, and that profit went to the Treasury. And that profit is called seigniorage. And as banks from around the world, I'm going to use that word seigniorage again, when banks from around the world take control, they're not worried about real production because they want to live off the interest rate. They want to live off the interest rate in all sorts of ways. And so that's what we have to work to change. So the next came, we would then show, I'm going to show a $20 bill. So that's inflation for you, because he would normally show $1. And where did this come from? Well, the Treasury printed this, but it gave this to the banking system, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, not for $20 or we'll say $100 bill. To get a $100 bill, the Federal Reserve only paid the Treasury 12.5 cents. It only paid it for the paper, the ink, the security to get it over to the Fed, and the Fed paid 12.5 cents. The other $99.87, 87.5 cents went to the Federal into the federal operating budget. Now, in that operating budget, if there's profit at the end of the year, after all of the ways they can operate, that money, that profit would go to the back to the treasury. And each year, some money goes back to the treasury. What doesn't go back to the treasury, and that would makes up about 3% of our circulating money in the United States. The other 97% is electronic money that the banks create. And the banks create that 97% based on investment. And what's an investment for the bank? It's bonds, but it's most of it, 70 to 80% are mortgages. So it is in those mortgages, they're just living off the interest rate. And rather than, and they're creating that money from an accounting standpoint. They're not borrowing money from people's deposits. They pay a little interest over there, but from an accounting standpoint, they're not using grandma's money in a savings account and moving it over here. They're actually creating new money, and the money supply of the whole nation is going up. And we need a better system. And I happen to have my own personal view of how we can make it better, but I'm not going to say that now. The idea is that everybody, common citizens, everybody who is of voting age, and everybody who's going to vote and who's going to be significant, we have to get our citizens strong. We have to get the education to our citizens so they can speak up to power and they can vote for good things. So that's my hope for all of us, and that's the AMI, and I know the AFJM's commitment in the United States, and we're working with the IMMR and all other organizations to help do that. And there will be another crisis, and it's our job all over the world as enlightened citizens who are working on this to have the ideas to go forward in a healthy way. Now, that would be my Zarlanga spiel. I'm going to describe this weekend's conference a little bit in a few minutes. One, it's not an introduction to money conference. Lucille gave us an introduction, and this conference is for the person, and isn't for just taking in a new person and learning about it. And I would say AFJM and other places may well do that very well. But if you're a new person and you're curious and you don't mind swimming in the deep end of the pool for a little bit, you're very welcomed. And you'll be able to make connections at this conference, and you'll start building pieces, and you'll be a monetary reformer in no time. It's not a difficult thing. It's a moral issue. Once you learn the morality behind it, you'll make progress and you'll be strong. Okay. So it's for the curious person as much as anyone. Now I'm going to mention there's 5 basic things going on at this conference. One, we're going to talk about people in different parts of the world. And Zaid's going to do a beautiful job of that. We're going to hear not only an Islamic perspective, but we're also going to hear about developing countries and developed countries. We'll make some comparisons, but it's going to, and when the comparisons are not equal, when we're not taking care of ourselves equally, we know the banks have got their interest rate, and there's somewhere a debt peonage system. There is not parity and power economics going on, but it's exploitative in much the way that Lucille described in her introduction. And that's enough for now. We'll learn about it in a positive way. We'll make good suggestions, and we'll come up with new ideas going forward. So one theme in the conference is listening from third world countries and getting a larger perspective, so that everybody's voice is included, not just Western citizens of Europe and the United States and a few more places perhaps, but we're all equally a part of this. The second theme that is also international will be Franz speaking tomorrow and a few more people thinking internationally. And Franz going to talk about transformational thinking and about maybe some ideas around a United Nations bank and how might that work and how can we work to address climate change. So those are two international aspects to money, and all of us can be thinking and working about both of those. Maybe we need to have an international voting in the United Nations to do this too, so our vote counts there. The third thing that's going to go on, well, let me go to the last thing because it's the opposite of the international. If the international is like your big, big picture, on Sunday morning, we're going to do a deep dive. What has, as Lucille mentioned, and perhaps I a bit, and others will as we go along, that it's been exploitative. And it's been exploitative. The Federal Reserve, the Federal Act, the Federal Reserve System started in 1913. So we have about 110 years in this country, but for the last 30 to 40 years, it's become particularly virulent in how it's taking over the system, and when it fails, how the central banks protect the rich. They're protecting Wall Street, not so much Main Street, and not so much the side streets. And we learned that in 2008, and we learned it again with the pandemic, but less so. They're getting a little smarter to take care of the Main Street and the side street some, but now we're suffering again right away with a crackdown that's going on now. So internationally, there's that going on, and in the Western world too. So what are the psychological effects on people? What is the culture? What happens to the sense of our commons as we create collateral out of everything that we hold dear together? It could be the water in Bolivia. It could be maybe healthy air someday. And back in the time, they wanted to make a nature bank and use as collateral Antarctica and Greenland and the Sahara and other places. So we need to rethink internationally, and we need to look at what are the effects not only on life in general, but also on humans. So Sunday morning, we're going to look at what's going on in our minds, inside of us, and what are the effects. And we'll look at, and Bruce Rogers-Vaughn, a clinician, will talk to us about that, and Bruce Wall will go further with that. Okay, and then on Saturday, we deal with the history of the money problem, how it works and how it came out, and more of the problem at a deep level. And then we'll be talking about too, the fifth theme is not only the history, but how do we go forward? How do we go forward? And we'll hear speakers on this.